Stellar network, which is a B2B cross-border payments system, sort of a transfer-wise for businesses, exclusively based on blockchain technology. So it's mostly instant if the local banking systems permit. So we're focusing on bank-to-bank transfer and replacing SWIFT with the Stellar network in our transfers. So, and that's a project we're about to launch and where most of our attention is at the moment. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this panel.
I'm Tzahi Kanza. I'm from Israel. I'm a partner in a group called Titanium. We are a technology group. We are around 110 people globally. Our main focus is blockchain, and one of our main activities under our venture studio called the Future Block, which is a venture studio for blockchain startups. We currently have 15 startups in this venture studio, that we gathered in the last 4 years and different topics and different, stages. We also manage the accelerator of the Malta government in Malta related to blockchain startups. And personally, I'm not only the partner in the group, I'm also managing Secure and Venture Rocket. Secure is a technology we developed based on blockchain to manage ecosystems that has investors, companies, assets, etc. And based on this technology, we developed few products. One of our leading products is Venture Rocket, which is targeted to ecosystems of startups, namely accelerator hub and this type of ecosystem. And currently we have around 80 something, accelerators running on this and hundreds of companies and, a few thousands of investors. So that's what I'm doing in my usual life when I'm not in conferences.
Yeah, so I think we have our last gentleman who joined us, Michael. We were just doing our introductions while you were away, so feel free to introduce yourself and a little bit about. Michael, can you hear us?
I can now. Sorry, there was a little connection issue on my end. Thanks so much for having me along and for your patience while I got my IT stuff sorted out. I think we're just on introductions, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Feel free to introduce yourself and.
Thank you. So my name's Michael Bacina. I'm partner leading the blockchain group in Piper Alderman in Sydney, Australia. So we work with a lot of digital currency exchanges and blockchain projects around the world, and particularly focused on the Asia Pacific area. So I've been lucky enough to testify to our Senate subcommittee on fintech in relation to central bank digital currencies, and it's a particular area of interest of mine.
Okay, yeah, thank you everyone for introductions, and let's jump right into the topic for discussion, which is national currencies. Apparently it's on the rise. We hear more and more news about national currencies being announced almost on a monthly basis today, or news about national currencies. So I think today we have China trying to come up with their digital yuan, which is actually kind of already a thing for digital currencies or digital payments, at least to have a very strong root in China. They have even gone out to do their closed sandbox or test environment out there just April this year. We have Venezuela coming up with their own cryptocurrency, as well as Russia, but these were much earlier, back in 2018. And even till today, 2 years later, even though there's not much to be seen, they are still trying to get it going. So currently, these are the states of national cryptocurrencies on what some people call central bank digital currencies. I think one key thing that's on everybody's mind is that to the crypto purists or maximalists, this kind of like an irony, because the whole concept about digital currencies or cryptocurrencies were that whole decentralization aspects in the first place. That's how kind of why Bitcoin was kind of born, or the vision that it was supposed to bring forth. So I think the very first question I would like to ask our panelists, which has very diverse in terms of our geographical regions, is that why do you think some of these countries are actually trying to come up with their cryptocurrencies? What's their motivation for digitalization of their currencies?
I'll start here. I believe the push initially is more experimental to see how adoptions can counteract some of the dominance of the US dollar on the national stage. Some of the motivations behind it, I think, from totalitarian nations is this idea and concept that blockchains may be able to control and audit occurrences from a control perspective. Although, if you really start digging in to some of the technologies being used, you actually see that they're more digital currency technologies and not necessarily blockchain based. So there's really no democratization as we are traditionally accustomed to. So although it's a little bit all over the place, I think that in general, the motivation is probably because these days the U.S. keeps using sanctions more and more, and they're experimenting to see if adoption would take place and cross-border payments can help fight against the dominance of the dollar and the U.S. in general. Well, we're going to have to see because they're not embracing some of the better features that would actually promote more democratization of monetary policies down to the individual, as traditional Bitcoin purists had envisioned. So I believe it's a good start, and I believe that in time the adoption for these countries will actually drive adoption of more traditional cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Mm-hmm. From what I saw, and in the last years, when more countries are taking a look at this, and if you do some research, you will see that I guess more than 50 or 60 or 70% from the countries until now have research already for this done by their central bank or their one of their economic bodies. And there are many reasons for that, but I think the main, the basic thing is that, governments see that there is a new technology, and I understand that this technology has the ability to change dramatically the economic policy of the country, but also the global one. So they understand that they have to be there, even in both ways. One is, to have their own, currency, what we discuss now, which is their own policy and it's their own activity on one hand, but also to understand what's going on in other places and how they should react. So based on that, different countries with different economic situations and political situations take it into different concepts. And at the end, when we talk about digital currency, there's huge amount of options, and it's really totally different concept, from one country to the other. For example, a country like US, when the dollar is so dominant, have different, concept when we talk about Venezuela, when their, currency has really no international capabilities at all, if any, in their own country. So I don't want to, take a lot of the time here, but I think when we talk about digital currency, the main concept is to really distinguish between the different types and the different policies behind it when we talk about each country that is, developing it.
Yeah, I can also chime in on that. It's very diverse, and the motivations are very diverse here. And I think it's in a way a bit driven by fear, or by just having a counter argument to these uncontrollable currencies in a way that cannot be censored, and create something that's still under national or national bank control, central bank control, but still has maybe the technical advantages, the same ones. So at least on that, they can compete and will still be able to supply, to control the money supply and other aspects and sort of blacklist addresses and all the sort of control that can be done with the current central bank based currencies. And I think that's what states are doing around the world, or national banks are doing around the world, because they see it's not going away. They could ignore it for long enough, but now with the volumes and the way the infiltration into financial institutions, and also when you look at the size of crypto exchanges and their volumes, I think that's kind of posing a threat to the monopoly that central banks have at the moment, and that's why they all react and do something. And triggered especially by Libra, and we will get to this I think in the next question. This really scared even more because suddenly we have the biggest social network on the planet adopting blockchain technology and sort of uncontrollable token, more or less. That's at least that was the perspective of the regulators. Really got people going and announcing all these projects.
Yeah, I think definitely. That's what we're probably going to talk about next. Is that governments should perceive or have perceived some of these transnational organization as threats or very real threats. I mean, we have Libra getting a Congress hearing seriously, and that the American government is taking a look at this in a much more serious manner when such big organizations are trying to move into that sphere and possibly threatening the dollar. So I think the next question here would be, if some of these transnational organizations that could be too big, why would they be a threat to the national currency in this case?
I think we have to really distinguish between the three types. The one type is what we call when the leading one is Bitcoin, when it's totally global and let's say it's decentralized. For sure, it's not controlled by one body. The second one is controlled by company like Facebook, and the third one is by the government. So it's totally different when we take a look at it. I think when we look at Bitcoin, as long as government can really, and especially in Bitcoin, which is not so difficult, they can control, there should be and will be, I guess, less opposition to that, and for specific usages. When we talk about corporates that want to become a global financial institute, I think there's a name for that, and they need to run under these regulations and new regulations that are coming from the capability of the digital asset, and in this case for sure it's a bigger threat, or should be considered in more stricter tools, especially because of the usage they want to do with the currency itself. The third thing that we discuss now when we talk about national cryptocurrencies or national digital currencies, the main idea for the government is totally different in the sense that they control the infrastructure. And the big debate, and this is the starting point, for sure they would want to control the infrastructure. The next question is, when they control the infrastructure, will they also control the applications? And I leave this open, to discussion here, but these are the main two topics, when governments are involved. For Facebook and this type of activities, I think the chances that this something like this, will gather, strength, globally, I'm sure it will be very, very regulated by the governments.
Yeah, let me jump in here and add to what you're saying. Our company, Blockchain of Things, recently got involved with one of the actions in the United States through the SEC. So we've actually experienced firsthand dealing with the U.S. government for the last 2 years. December 18th, we actually signed a settlement with them. So looking from the inside, what I would say is that in the U.S. at least, we have very strong laws and very strong regulations, and considered the epitome of what would be controls in place. And a lot of the laws that have been created around traditional assets and money go back to the 30s and 40s. So they're trying to retrofit a lot of the laws and regulations that existed in an antiquated era to what's happening today. There is a perception that there is some fear, but I don't know if the fear is the fear necessarily of the open market or how to properly regulate what's going on, because the incarnation of digital currency, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain are very vast. No longer are we really dealing with simply a payment method. We're dealing with a payment method. We're dealing with a new asset class. We're dealing with a technology. So the laws don't work. So they're trying to sit back and mold. And through the 2 years that we directly dealt with the SEC, they were very open to understanding what was going on. But at the same time, they have mandates around the specific rules and regulations they need to adhere to. And lots of regulations and laws lag technology. So technology moves quickly, governments move very, very slowly. And I think that that's a lot of the confusion that's happening presently. Sadly, some companies like our own, right, got caught up in this dragnet. I could say that it was a very difficult experience, but at least today, actually on Monday, we filed what's called the Form 10 in the U.S., and we will be one of the first 2 or 3 legal tokens in the United States, our BCOT token that we got caught up in. But if you adhere to the rules and you have enough money and time to do things correctly, there are paths forward. And I have to say that from my personal experience and where we are today. I'm very proud to say that we're not just going to be a random token. We're a token blessed by the United States government, blessed by the Securities and Exchange Division, and hopefully a company that will be respected versus a lot of these companies that have sold tokens in Asian markets that don't have credible technology or don't have a credible company. So things will evolve. It's just that governments take a little bit longer to evolve.
Can I just ask quickly, Andre, this is a stablecoin you're talking about, a dollar stablecoin?
No, this is a pure cryptocurrency token that we sold that powers our product. Recently, we've had to make some changes, of course, because the token is now considered a security in the United States as of Monday, by the way. Right, so you could go to Edgar and look up all of the information for the company. It's very difficult to sell a security to power a product, and that's where the conundrum lies, right? So we've had to build some technologies to abstract that, where we could take payments from people and do internal distribution of tokens within our own system to power our own system, so people can use our product if they have a token and if they bought it, or if they didn't buy it, the company has to fund it. So those are some of the challenges. So if anyone is interested in the experiences my company has gone through in the United States, and we can clear some paths, any of the audience members, any of the panelists, I'm always available. Just reach out.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Would there be anyone else who would like to jump in on this question on transnational kind of organizations that try and do the same thing as government?
Yeah, just a few notes. I mean, the interesting question is, how will these interact and how will they compete with each other? Because they do essentially the same thing, right? So we have a stable coin issued by a private company, and we have a stable coin issued by a central bank. For the consumer and for the business, it's doing the same thing. It's just probably different costs of moving them around, and also different ways of attaining these tokens. And I'm really curious if they will be traded against each other at crypto exchanges, and how this will play out. Because as I said, the consumer doesn't care, and I think the easiest to move around and to attain will be the one that sort of wins or gets a market share. But it might be like derivative markets at the moment, that there will be many competing ones, and not a dominant one, maybe by industry or by geography. There might be different dollars or different euro tokens that are being used, or yuan, or whatever tokens there might be. And so I think it's going to stay a very diverse marketplace in a way, where they still have to compete, and they cannot outlaw the private company issued ones, and just push through the governmental tokens.
Yeah. If we have 1 minute more about this topic, I think there's a huge difference when we talk about stable coins like Tether, or this type of more or less custodian concepts, than into other stable coins that are targeted to create a new currency, not pegged, to dollar or something like this, and also to become, doing banking, let's say financial or banking activities based on this. There's a huge difference between the two. And, the Tether concept, which is very simple, could be accepted, but others are extremely complicated. And currently, I don't see any big government, let's say, I'm not talking about small countries that may be accepting this, big governments that have huge amount of population that might be in risk by using it, accepting this. Because, one of the idea of the government, financial, security is to protect, their citizens.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, that how there's a fundamental difference still within the stable coins and the government coins and other cryptocurrencies, of course. And in actuality, like at the end of the day, do people really care whether your money is in Alipay or WeChat Pay? I mean, people will be happy to receive in both. In China today, there's no differentiator. Yeah. And I'm sure when the digital yuan comes in, it's just another app that they have on their phone, and they'll be happy to receive money from it or spend money from it. Same for merchants, same for consumers. Maybe there's some sort of consolidation that the government can put forth, that the underlying technology has now to be used in Alipay or WeChat Pay to be the digital yuan. But we'll definitely keep an eye out on how that will work out. So I think we'll go to our last question actually in our because of our very limited time. We have about 5 minutes left. But in your opinion, so this is quite a broad stroke kind of question. How do you think the national cryptocurrency will play out in terms of for consumers, for the crypto market, for the whole blockchain industry? Maybe feel free to jump in.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Maynard.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as Andrea pointed out in the beginning, I think it will generate a real huge boost in the traditional cryptocurrencies if suddenly governments adopt blockchain and crypto technology in the background. I think this will help the whole market, and everything will just grow bigger because of that. The amount of stable coins will grow, but also I think non-stable coins or crypto coins will grow. I mean, there will be also an interesting question how this will be solved on a technical level, and that's what's very close to my heart, or to what we are doing. We're very close to the action when it comes to technology. And networks like Ripple and Stellar are exactly, they're good layers or good transport layers, let's say, for these sort of tokens. They're already prepared for that. They have an infrastructure in place. They could serve as some sort of a global network that all these currencies can be exchanged on or run on. And that's what we're trying to currently achieve. because we, frankly, as a business, we need stablecoins to do our international money transfers and do the exchange on these networks. We don't really care what network works in the background. We just want it now. We need it scalable and functioning, and not in a beta or alpha. So we have some networks there that are working already quite fine with this, and they can transact cheaply and have a sort of a validator structure in place. And that's something that it would need, that we have let's say a shared infrastructure for all these CBDCs. And I hope that emerges, and open standards for that are a must. And there's going to be collaboration, maybe even greater than we've seen in traditional payment networks so far on a global level.
Yeah, let me jump in here. I can't wait, to tell you quite honestly. So there's a lot of people, traditionalists. I know Maynard has been in this field for at least as long as I have. And individuals talk about, oh, when is cryptocurrency really going to get adopted? Or when's Bitcoin going to hit a couple of $100,000 per unit? My belief is that will happen the minute governments release their own cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And the reason for that is the companies that are more suited to display the information on both stable coins and government coins are the companies that have the wallet technology today, right? The minute you have the wallet technology, it's really, really easy to integrate a government currency along with Bitcoin and Tether and Ethereum. And then all of a sudden, the individual who's stuck in their economic bubble and doesn't see the deflation with their own currency will notice that if their money is in the national currency, it's losing value up against Bitcoin. It's losing value up against Ethereum. So they'll sit back and say, why am I keeping my money in the national currency when I can keep it in Bitcoin and transfer it out in my wallet whenever I want, as opposed to losing money? So we see what's happening in Europe. We see what's happening in different countries with negative interest rates. There are individuals who are withdrawing their money from a bank and putting it in a safety deposit box. Now, these same individuals will do the same thing. They'll just perceive the safety deposit box as Bitcoin or alternative cryptocurrencies. And when that happens and a person can see directly in a simple interface that their national currency is losing value up against cryptocurrency, then the likes of Bitcoin will explode. And that's why I really can't wait. So cryptocurrency guys who believe that government currencies are a threat, I think are misguided.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
totally agree.
From my perspective, because it's a new thing, governments that has their own currencies, I think to predict what will happen, I think nobody can predict. And I also believe that, few countries you will be right, Andre, and the others you'll be wrong. And from the same reason, will have different, implication in different countries. So of course, for blockchain technology and for the concept of blockchain technology is a good technology to run payment, infrastructure, 100%, no doubt. But what it will do to Bitcoin and what the government will decide to do to Bitcoin, and more specifically, what a government would do when they know that their citizens want to move their, their assets, and all their financial, balance, from the country's currency to the other currency, I'm not so optimistic about it. Maybe even, this is one of the things these governments are not willing to be involved exactly because of this, aspect. So we need to wait and see, but I don't think governments, are looking, from the easiest, way of the citizen to move its money, to other, assets and make more money. I'm not so optimistic about that.
I share that lack of optimism around the space. I think governments will do what will add to the economy. And I think that, sorry to be having technical issues. I think that the convenience trumps all. So I'm not sure we'll see any kind of huge boost to like a massive rise in other cryptocurrencies as CBDCs come in. In fact, Canada's a great example. They've said when they see digital currencies becoming really widespread, they will roll out a CBDC quickly. So they're public saying that, and they're already developing their CBDC, but they're going to keep it in reserve until they see the usage. So there's a chicken and an egg problem around CBDCs will drive digital currencies, but in many cases, they're going to be hoping to be a fast follower and bring out a CBDC when they see people really want to use it. I'm not sure they're going to be driving the adoption that people are hoping for, because unless you have convenience and user interfaces that work really well, then you won't get the adoption. And I don't buy the argument that governments don't want people to move their assets out of their national currency, because right now you can buy Forex really easily and move your money around or into shares or gold. So people can vote with their feet in existing financial infrastructure. But I think as more government gets knowledgeable about smart contracts and the permissionless nature of CBDCs, not the decentralized nature, but the permissionless nature of them to drive financial products, that's what I've seen, particularly around tax collection. A lot of government representatives get very interested. The idea that sales tax could be automatically collected and remove a massive amount of paperwork from the economy and give this really interesting insight is valuable to governments, and it's a huge value add for the regular citizen. It's nothing to do with the libertarian dreams of Bitcoin, but the efficiency is gigantic.
Just wanted to point out, so capital control of capital movement is not the same everywhere in the world. So there are some disadvantaged nations, and I think they will benefit greatly from having the choice of exporting or exchanging into liquid assets or movable assets, and that will open up some trade for them and be more part of the global trade that they are now. Just to point that out. And also, I think they will coexist. So there will be the governmental stablecoins, and there will be private stablecoins, same as now e-money coexists with just normal bank accounts, or like government-controlled banks, or let's say government-licensed banks. And so it will nicely fit into that ecosystem. That's also what we see in the projects that we are now engaging with, that e-money is becoming an increasing area of interest here, how we can apply the existing e-money regulation to stablecoins or to cryptocurrency tokens. And that's probably something Andre has something to say about battling with the regulation.
Yeah, well, if we just take two steps back and we consider stablecoins, for instance, we know that many countries and many citizens in different countries, they'll put dollar bills to hedge up against the fluctuation of their currency under their mattress. I don't know that the U.S. necessarily dislikes these stable currencies, because the U.S. has a massive problem with counterfeiting and things of that nature. So the stable coins actually help the U.S. when it represents the dollar itself, right? So it doesn't necessarily hinder the United States. It helps them. And that's one of the reasons why the U.S. every few years prints a new form of dollar bill. So I don't know that these stable currencies are a threat to the U.S. I think they're a greater control and actually help the nation based on what happens in outside countries.
I agree. I think that's a very big deal. I think that they're not necessarily a threat, but it's just a real conceptual challenge around private money, public money. Private money's always existed. It existed sort of and was co-opted into credit cards. Before credit cards, you all had your accounts at shops, and people effectively had private money being issued in the form of vouchers all the time. During the Depression, a lot of towns in the US issued their own money in some strange experiments, which are really interesting. The history of money is a fascinating one that a lot of people around blockchain get into, because there's a lot of rhyme in the history of regular money that's being played out in DeFi in particular. So but I still maintain it, and the efficiency is what will drive governments to use it, where they can see a big benefit, just like in the public. But you've already got things sneaking in with smart contracts showing up on Bloomberg terminals now and things like that, using other stable coins, and that kind of thing is going to drive governments to say, hang on a minute, we don't want people paying in USDTs. We'd rather have it in a regular government-issued digital currency. And I followed with great interest during the early days of the COVID, the stimulus bills in the US, which tried to introduce a form of Federal Reserve bank account through a digital wallet for every American, which would have been quite interesting had it got through, but unfortunately got stripped out of the legislation before it made it in there. But that would be far more potentially destabilizing to banks by making every single bank have to offer these things at zero cost and then have the federal government pay for them all, which is really interesting. Still being pushed by a number of US Congress and senators, but I'm not sure that kind of revolutionary thing will get too far. We'll have to see what happens.
Irwin, are you on?
We can hear you.
Irwin, you're on mute.
Oh, can you guys hear me now? So sorry.
Yeah, now.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so sorry about that. Yeah, so very good points that has been raised across the board, and I think most of us kind of do agree that they could coexist somehow, and it doesn't. They are not a threat as of now yet, right? So there's two questions from the floor. Let me just read them out. So the first question is national security implications of cryptocurrencies. Not very specific, but I would assume this could be something to do with privacy or feel free to interpret.
Can you say it again, the question?
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, so sorry. Okay, so the question is, or it's not really a question, or it's not phrased as a question at least. It's the national security implications of cryptocurrencies. Maybe what are some of the implications in terms of security or privacy, in terms of cryptocurrencies? Maybe what form will they take for national cryptocurrencies?
I interpret a question like that to be what's going to happen when there's a central bank issued cryptocurrency, which is then used by an entire country, much in the same way that many countries use the US dollar now. If someone puts up a cryptocurrency that works at a national level, a country next door might take on that currency just by habit because it's more convenient. So if a really good payment system comes out with a CBDC attached, you can simply use that in the same way that in China you see the proliferation of the massive payment networks, and in other countries, other payment networks getting big as well. That would be a real monetary sovereignty risk to a country, which would sound in national security, because if another central bank effectively controls your currency, and it's not physically able to be stuffed under mattresses, but it could be digitally turned off, which some CBDC projects are planning to have that kind of remote control. That's a massive national security problem, because who needs to take over a country if you can shut down their monetary system? Or just slow it down a bit.
Yeah, national security also comes in many different flavors, and I think we've all experienced that more recently, right? So I'm a traditional Bitcoin guy, and it's obvious with COVID that Bitcoin really doesn't work unless you're using a second layer technology on top of it, because countries need, from a national security perspective, to issue more money in times of distress. COVID all over the world is a great example of that. And the amount of money that has been distributed to the citizens, and I'll speak to the country I'm in the United States, not that I necessarily agree with it, has been a tremendous amount of money that they've had to print. Now, that's a necessity. What happens with a currency that has a cap in such a situation? And that's a threat to national security. Why? Because it collapses the economy. If you collapse the economy, you collapse the revenue to fight wars and to impose rules. So it comes in many different flavors. And I think this whole COVID thing has been an awakening, not only for me, but for many traditionalists in the cryptocurrency space.
I agree with that, Andre. It's I've always thought around a lot of the limited supply cryptocurrencies, the specter of the 1930s, when monetary supply wasn't increased, when there was financial and economic shocks, and the result was the Great Depression. There's many causes that fed into it, but a very serious one was government contracting spending, particularly in the US before the New Deal. And I don't think we're ever going to see a CBDC which is a fixed supply, because no government would rationally agree to tie their hands ever. So, but delivering funds to people, there was all kinds of issues that were most well reported in the US about problems getting cash out to individuals. and things going out with checks with Donald Trump's signature on them, and I can't believe people are still using checks. It's very amusing, but that's that kind of payment rails is so powerful, and that's the permissionless side, not so much the decentralized side of these things, which is fascinating economically, but we'll see where those experiments go. And that's why I think things like Bitcoin end up looking much more like digital gold in the long run than viable currencies because of their fixed supply.
Yeah, let me just also I want to say a few words. So this is more of a systemic criticism. You say it's a necessity that quantitative easing is taking place and that money is being printed and there's no gold standard. It's just the way that was chosen, and I don't know if it's the best tool. It's the tool that's available to governments, and they use it heavily in this crisis. I'm sure there would be other ways, or other ways would be found if that tool wouldn't be available. And that a fixed money supply, or more or less fixed money supply, led to the Great Depression. I would also want to challenge. It's an easy tool. If you create a tax for everyone, if you kind of dilute everyone that holds this currency, of course that's an easy fix. But it's kind of unfair. So you're taxing everyone else for the mistakes that maybe a few huge institutions are doing. And I don't know, that's exactly what fixed supply cryptocurrencies are challenging. And I see the likes going up crazy.
Sorry, Meinhard, are you saying that a fixed supply, that the issue of new money acts as a de facto tax on everybody who's holding the existing currency?
It does, right? It's inflating. It's inflation. You just
correct.
Money you dilute. It's the same as if I give out equity from my company, I dilute everyone else, and I do that knowingly, and I have to inform everybody, and everybody has to sort of agree to that. I would be interested what happens if the population is asked, hey, do you want to be diluted by X% in the next year? They aren't, right? So the shareholders of nations aren't really being considered in a democratic way. So just kind of challenged a little bit. So it's good that we have choice now, that we can see these experiments where it's fixed and see how they play out. And as you said rightly, it's more of a digital gold if you have fixed supply. And maybe a digital gold could be used to run economies, but unless we change the whole system of how people are asked about their financial, sovereignty, then we can't really just stop printing money. I suppose that's just not possible. But yeah, new islands can emerge from this financial freedom and this permissionless innovation that we've created with the cryptocurrency ecosystems.
Absolutely. I think, Meinhard, you and I may have a different discussion to chat about economics when we have more time over a digital Zoom drink.
Can do.
But I agree with
I'm not an economist. Yeah, I'm not an economist. I consider myself sort of a craftsperson that has a very simple view, or a pragmatic person. And how I understand money or how people think money works and how it actually works. There's a big disconnect. And that is, I think, done in part for a reason. So if everybody would be aware, as I said, like shareholders that have to agree to dilution, it wouldn't be so easy for countries just to print money.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that is the psychological impact of, say, the Weimar Republic, when people knew money was being printed and you saw someone wheeling a barrow full of money, whereas nowadays, where things are digital, there seems to be a real psychological disconnect that nobody at a large scale views monetary easing or quantitative easing as inflationary, and therefore, due to the wonders of economic psychology, if no one considers it inflationary, we don't get inflation as it traditionally exists. We just get the stock market shooting through the roof, which is probably people choosing to move their money into things they see value that aren't the currency, which is a very strange situation we find ourselves in. But where does it end is an ongoing experimental question.
There's one small remark about this. There's a huge difference between a cryptocurrency like Stellar or Bitcoin and the government currency, because when you have let's say 100 Stellar in market and you make 10 more, then you dilute it in 10%. But it's not like this in governments. The currency of the state is totally different. If US print more money, it will not be diluted, with the same percentage of the money they printed, and there are a lot of, monetary possibilities to play with what we call circulation of money in market. For example, lowering the reserve rate of the banks so they can, lend, 10 times. So it's not really straightforward. And especially when you look at US, they can print, look at what they did in 2008, how much, monetary active they did, and what was the influence on the USD. It's all, you need to compare to other currencies. So when you talk about a country, I think it's totally different when you talk about, specific crypto made by one company like Stellar or like, even like Bitcoin.
I just pulled up a graph. You can't see it now for M1.
Yeah,
sorry,
exactly.
M1 money, and it looks sort of bonkers. Like what happens now. How much money was created in just 1 month or in a day, essentially. I don't think that's sustainable. It's sort of a quick fix, but the long-term effects will be felt for quite some time. And whenever a graph goes like that, anywhere in trading, it's a sign to get out of that asset.
Yeah. So the question by whom, does US citizen holding USD will be affected, or maybe other countries holding other currency without any direct connection to the amount of money printed by the government. So because at the end, US can print and people from all over the world buy, then no problem, right?
But for most people, if you try and explain to them how the government bond buying system works in America, their eyes will glaze over. It's not. It's described by the economist as printing money, but not in that 1919 Weimar Republic style way of actual distribution of cash, or in several African countries, Zimbabwe, they got into crazy inflationary cycles. So it is interesting the way the psychology is held for that. But Meinhard's absolutely right. The liquidity increase is just gargantuan. But I think that the underlying technology that a CBDC enables, the example I always give is being able to buy the forward revenue of businesses that could never sell it before because they couldn't do it in an effective way. Revenue share agreements from a lawyer's perspective are complicated and horrible and very hard to stick with, but very easy for smart contracts and tills that can process payments. So that kind of efficiency is so big, together with the tax efficiency, that I think it's just unavoidable that the CBDCs will come through. And then it's going to be really interesting that if you can see the total monetary supply of a country and go, oh, it just went up, and it's very public, you get a lot closer to having that transparency for a government. Or when they do their budget, instead of having to sit through discussions of politicians talking about things, you could see a dashboard that says, okay, the government's budget was this, and they actually spent this much money in this way. That radical transparency is incredible. And that's a very interesting thing around governments using for themselves, which is a very interesting thing I'd like to see in the future, which for all this stuff.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of the panel today. I think we did have a small connectivity issue, but apart from that, everything was okay. So I thank you all for joining today and being part of this panel session. We look forward to have you with us again on one of our offline programs, probably in November in Bali. So we'll be connected to you. Thank you so much for being part of this panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, Irwin, for more.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you, Irwin.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Now we will start the next session. So as usual, you can move to the next room or we will move you automatically. Another panel is ready and waiting for you. Thank you. See you.